Falcon's Rest is a bar and grill on Old Route 7. It is located where three counties intersect and is a little outside the city limits. The Rest, as it is known, is sometimes referred to as a cop bar because a large portion of the customers are law enforcement officers. As a place for a secret meeting, it would be last on most people's list, which put it at the top of mine. I parked in the well-stocked parking lot and headed for the main entrance. As police bars go, the Rest was better equipped than most, with a large open bar area stacked with tables for seating. On the last Friday of the month, the place was busy but not too crowded. It was the perfect situation for my meeting with Sergeant Devon. There were enough witnesses here that the meeting didn't seem like a secret. When I entered, I was met with hostile stares from most of the visitors. I expected nothing less, for the lawyer was suspected of murdering his unfaithful wife and her lover, a police detective. Of course, there was no conviction or charge. It's hard to do that without evidence. No bodies were found, and the lover's car was missing, along with the lovebirds. Nevertheless, I was guilty. The couple disappeared without a trace. I had a motive, and I was a lowly lawyer. Who needs proof outside the courtroom? Devon, who arrived, didn't look too pleased with my choice of venue. He was a tall, well-built black man. He could only be described as an honorable man. He was here to repay a debt and thereby cleanse his soul of the guilt he carried for owing a man of my character. Now, dear reader, I will be frank and declare that I am what is called venal or crooked, a lawyer without the slightest claim to moral character. I am an unindicted co-conspirator in half a dozen organized crime cases. Poor Devon was having a really tough time the day he walked into my office with a thick stack of foreclosure papers. Devon Cross, then a Metropolitan Police officer, had been victimized by predatory mortgage loan fraud lenders, and in those early days of 2008, he and his wife and 4 children were about to become another sad homeless man. He had gone around to all the honest and quasi-honest lawyers without getting any substantial help. He approached me out of pure desperation. To tell you the truth, I don't know why I helped him. To me, there was nothing special about it. He was an honest policeman and a good man, loyal to his friends, but not someone I could use. He couldn't pay. Being an honest man, he told me that right away. Online scammers had taken his last dollars. The foreclosure was scheduled for the next day. He just sat in my office, a large, physically strong man with tears in his eyes, and told me about his daughter, his little princess. She had cancer, and he didn't know how to tell her and her brothers that they were about to lose their home. I filed for bankruptcy to stop the sale. I then had some of my most dishonest clients visit a mortgage broker and get an admission that the documents used in the foreclosure were forged. In other words, a mortgage fraudster represented by 2 of the more violent criminals had, for once, told the truth. It only took a bigger bribe to the court than Deutsche Bank was willing to pay to get justice for once. Why did I do all this? I still can't say, but it was hard for Devon Cross to live with the realization that his family home had been saved by a crook like me. "You picked a strange place to meet," he said. "Even a guy like me has a conscience. I couldn't let you get confused by helping me." "So you picked this place?" he asked as Lottie the barmaid approached. "What can I offer you, Bruce?" She turned to me. She and I had a long association of harmless flattery and excessive advice on my part. She had a young son and no man at home, and she had made the mistake of preferring attractiveness to reliability. There was tension in Lottie's demeanor. Everyone said I was guilty. Accordingly, I must be, which meant that anyone associated with me would suffer. And yet I noticed that Lottie came to the table when she could have transferred my services to another. Lottie was a good friend. As it turned out, I had more people like her than I realized. I wouldn't want them to suffer for their loyalty. I needed to do something to get my life back and let people know they could relax around me. Devon Cross was in my way, throwing me a lifeline, but I had to make the most of it. "Get us 2 Boston beers, Lottie," I said. "I must admit you have a courageous counselor." "Come into this place where Paul Moreno's friends and work buddies sit," Devon said. Paul Moreno was the bastard who seduced my wife and thus got me into shit. He, his Ford GT, and my wife disappeared on the night of March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, and the night before, successive thunderstorms flooded 3 counties around Schoharie Creek. In any of the western states, this body of water would be called a river, but here it was mistakenly called a creek, a tempting name that led to much suffering. People persevered to build bridges and buildings around this treacherous but modestly named body of water. They paid a high price in lives and property for misunderstanding the Schoharie. By early March 18th, all the emergency crews were busy rescuing people stranded by the flood. No one noticed that my wife and her lover were missing for a few days. Then, of course, suspicion immediately fell on me. "Victory belongs to the brave, as they say," I said to Devon, and we chatted at length about nothing while he did what he had come for. I waited 2 beers, then said, "Just tell me what you came to tell me and I'll do the rest. Trust me, and no one will ever believe the advice came from you." Then he leaned over and whispered, "They have a warrant, and they will come to your home and office at 6 o'clock Sunday morning." I pushed back my chair and stood up to let it fall, then shouted, "Look, when I need advice, I'm not going to seek it from some subway pig, and he'll be a better friend than you. And for the last time, I don't know what happened to my wife." I ran out, leaving a rather confused Devon behind me, but he was a smart guy and realized that everyone would believe the worst. They would see him as an ambitious cop looking to advance our relationship. A confession on my part would be a feather in any cop's cap. Trying to wrest a confession from me wouldn't hurt him, but being seen with me in a secret meeting would ruin him. As it was so public that no one would believe he'd tipped me off. Walking out of Falcon's Rest, I sighed. I had only myself to blame for things getting to such a deplorable state. I had let my heart take over my head. Now I would have to work hard to get out from behind the 8-ball we call justice in this country. And yet my late wife's words about milk haunted me. They were a swarm of killer bees stinging my heart until all the blood drained out. 1st of October from the diary of Elaine Gray, Mrs. Bruce Gray. I saw him again today. He is very tall and handsome, with wavy black hair. Jenny says she knows him. In fact, she slept with him. He's a police officer, which means he's following me for something to do with Bruce. It's hard to believe that someone as ordinary as Bruce could make others so suspicious, but it probably has to do with the fact that he is an attorney for such high-profile criminals. After all, the people he deals with are far more interesting than poor Bruce. Don't get me wrong, I love him dearly. He's such a teddy bear. The kind of person you feel safe with. Why people think he's dangerous, I'll never know. Jenny says the cop chasing me is a real stud, very rich. His name is Paul Marino. Jenny has been dating him for the last 6 months. Her husband Bob is a clone of my Bruce, except he has a boring real estate practice, not some black hat criminal defense attorney. You can't blame Jenny for succumbing to a cop's enticements. After all, the temptation is so great. After 7 years of marriage and 2 kids, she's looking for a little thrill, or so she says. I, on the other hand, after 15 years of marriage with a 14-year-old daughter, am ready for a rocking chair on the back porch. Women like me just don't attract the attention of young studs. It makes me feel so old. October 15th. Bruce is away again. I swear that man is traveling out of town more and more often. If it were anyone else, I'd suspect infidelity, but this man is as faithful as a spaniel. He joined a gym today. Jenny was the one who pushed me into it. She's into fitness and needed a partner. I'm not in such bad shape, not like Bruce who suffers from middle age, but Jenny needed a partner and I could use the physical toning. I've increased my morning jog from 1 to 2 miles, but I need to work on my stomach and butt. I'm feeling anxiety about emptying my nest. Maybe getting in shape will help. Why did I let my 14-year-old talk me into this boarding school? I swear, Rachel's just like my mother, all feminine ambition. No concern for others. My mom still makes fun of my choice of profession, but I believe that helping others is the highest calling anyone can aspire to. Being a social worker is often frustrating, But on those rare days when you realize you've helped another person change their life, there is no greater reward. On the other hand, Rachel may be trying to get rid of the stigma of Bruce's profession. People say such cruel things. A teenage girl can be very sensitive. It may be better overall if Rachel goes away, but a mother can't help but miss her child. I saw him again today. God, he's so handsome. He was at my gym. What a stud he is. He was wearing such a tight suit. You could see the sculpted outline of his abdominal muscles, but I tried not to look at the bulge in his shorts. It couldn't be just him. Why he keeps following me, I'll never know, but Paul Moreno is definitely getting attention. October 17th. Saw Paul Moreno at the gym again today. He caught my eye, but all he did was hold eye contact until I was forced to avert my eyes. Jenny says he must be interested in me, but I can't figure out why, unless it has something to do with Bruce. I thought about Paul all the time. It was just a harmless fantasy. Nothing wrong with fantasizing, right? November 2nd. I voted today. Not that it matters. As I was leaving the polling place, I saw Paul again. He wasn't trying to hide. He hadn't followed me for a while, but in the last few days he had returned. He actually said hello to me. I stopped and spoke to him. "Are you following me again?" I asked. "Well, that's my job and my excuse." "Justification?" "What would you say if I was just following you?" "Why would you do that?" "Have you looked in a mirror lately?" "Stop. I'm the mother of a teenager." Ever heard the term MILF? No, what is it? It's a term for a hot mom like you who turns on all the young guys. Stop it, I'm an old lady. Yes, unfortunately you are an old lady, but not old, just mature. That's when I saw an acquaintance and interrupted the conversation. I couldn't believe he was flirting with me like that. Sure, I've lost 5 pounds since I joined the gym, but still such a young guy was interested in me. It certainly helps to hang in there. At first, I was intimidated by all these young girls with their hard bodies, but finding a personal trainer and continuing to work out is clearly paying off. Bruce has noticed. 24 roses just arrived. When I called and asked why, he said he just wanted to send them to his beautiful wife. What can you say about a man like that? I love him very much. I may flirt with a handsome young man, but I will not betray my loving husband. Next chapter. "Jake," I said as soon as he picked up the phone. "Jesus, do you know what time it is, counselor?" "I've been calling you since about 9. "I've been at work," Jake Trumbull replied. "Well, I've got a new job for you." "Can it wait?" "No, it's urgent." "And what is it?" "I need a complete black binder at my residence and office by Sunday dawn." "This Sunday?" "Yes, this Sunday." "It takes 72 hours and you're giving me 24 at best." "I'm sorry, I just got a message that I need it." "Well, it's going to cost you a lot." "How much?" 35, Jake said. "After all the business I sent you?" "That's my special price. For anyone else, it would be 50. Jake made no mention of the fact that it was unlikely I'd live to send him any more cases. Moreover, at this point, whether I was a business partner or not, I was in no position to bargain. He could charge me any price he wanted, and I would have to pay it. "Fine, but do it," I said. Next chapter, November 9th. I've seen Paul 3 times in the last week. Now he's always smiling and waving. Jenny is having a full-on affair with him. She says he's the best she's ever had in bed. He's 29, 8 years younger than me. Jenny says that with him she feels like it's the first time she's ever been with him. Today, as I was sitting at Starbucks sipping my mocha latte, Paul came over and sat at my table. For a long time he just sat there looking at me, and I studiously ignored him, but finally he broke the silence. "I've been reassigned," he said. "What?" "I'm no longer officially following you." "And what does that mean?" "Well, among other things, it means that my superiors have decided that whatever crimes your husband may have committed, you are not involved in anything illegal," he said. Then he reached across the table to cover my hand with his and said, But it also means that I can now tell you how much I like you. I'd like us to get to know each other better. You know I'm married. What does it mean to get to know me better? He reached out with his other hand and took mine between his. It means you're a beautiful woman married to a man who can't satisfy you. You deserve to experience love the way it should be between a man and a woman. What about Jenny? I heard you and her had something going on. What Jenny and I had was purely recreational. She's not satisfied in her marriage, but I'm looking for something more. Besides, you can't believe any man would choose Jenny over you, he said with a smile. Like I said, I'm married. I've never cheated on my husband. Can he say the same? You've seen my husband. What do you think? I think we both know you deserve better. With those words, I stood up, leaving most of my latte unfinished. I needed to get out of there. This man was having such an effect on me that I was getting uncomfortable. The 1st of December. See, I hadn't seen Paul since he'd bumped into me at the coffee shop, and I was beginning to dread, and at the same time take comfort in the fact that I might not see him again. I regretted it. His attention was amazing to my ego, and I had to admit that I desired him on a purely physical level. Moreover, I had never been with any man other than my husband. I confess I was curious to know what another man would be like, especially such a rich and skillful lover. After work, I was walking to my car in the DSS parking lot. I was a little late, delayed by paperwork. The parking lot was well lit but empty. As I walked to my car, I got the distinct feeling that someone was watching me. I bent down to open the door, and suddenly he was right next to me. I jumped back frightened. Paul, you almost scared me to death. Are you stalking me now? I'm sorry, he said, fumbling his hand around my waist under my open coat. I just needed to see you. I keep thinking about you. I probably should have been scared, but the truth was that he occupied my thoughts almost constantly. I wanted to see him again. Please, I begged, leave me alone. I can't do this to my husband. In response, he only leaned over and kissed me. Some kind of force passed between us. I need you, he said, more than any woman I have ever known. If it were only on my part, I'd leave you alone, but I can feel your body calling to me. I couldn't resist kissing him back, but then pushed him away, jumping into the car. I can't. I wish I could, but I can't. Next chapter. They didn't bother to knock. 4 officers in assault uniforms picked the door lock and broke into my house at dawn Sunday morning. I guess they figured they'd catch me sleeping. I was up and in the kitchen, preparing what the tourist brochures call a full English breakfast. True, I substituted lox instead of kippers, but I found a specialty store that sold kidney pie. I was just frying scrambled eggs in a large frying pan when the first stormtrooper entered the kitchen. I hope you like scrambled eggs, I said, as he grabbed me and pushed me out of the house. They held me in a police van while they tore my house apart. They were doing the obvious, ripping up carpet and digging up flower beds. I was glad I had mostly chosen wood floors. They chipped away a few boards, but mostly left the upper floors intact. The basement they trashed. What I was most unhappy about was the fact that they got into the trunk of my car. It seemed like pure spite since I'd left the keys in the ignition, but destruction seemed to be the order of the day. But despite all of that, they weren't all that bad. When the destruction in my house stopped, several officers I'd befriended over the years invited me to Denny's for lunch. Where did you put the bodies, Bruce? They asked, as I ate what the menu called the Big Breakfast, which was a decided disappointment after my planned meal. As far as I can tell, there are no bodies. Come on, they disappeared in March. It's October now. Do you think it will rain today? It's been very dry after those spring and summer storms. My flower beds are gone, and I'll have to replant bulbs if I want flowers this spring. Still, I'm better off than those people around Shohari Creek, I said, referring to the flooding by the creek. My interlocutors at Denny's weren't paying attention to the flood victims or the flowers. They were only interested in one thing. They wanted my confession in the worst possible way, because in the end, they had virtually no evidence. The problem was that I knew the condition could change as quickly as a creek spills over. I wouldn't expect to see spring flowers if I were you, but you'll feel better if you help us. We know you had a good reason for what you did. Maybe you just lost your head. Stop being a lawyer for once and become a man. Take responsibility and we'll help you. I don't think it's going to rain. It looks like we're in for a drought after the rainy weather. I'll stop by Lou's for some light bulbs. All right, have it your way, lawyer, but cop killers get fried in this state. You might want to think hard about that. Next chapter, December 9th. I had a hell of a day. We got the call early. 5 kids in need of protection. I don't normally work in child protective services. However, this is busy season and a time of year when we are short-staffed. Because of the bad flu season and the fact that people needed time for the holidays, we had to be flexible. Still, 5 children under 7 needing emergency care was a bad day. By 4 o'clock, we had temporarily placed the children and organized a support system for the new foster parents. I was feeling pretty good when the state foster care called and said they were not happy with the placement of the children. It was the same old nonsense you always get from the state. If you can believe it, they were concerned that child care payments were being made to people in the state retirement system. This could be considered double-crossing, said a woman from the state. For an hour, we went around and around on the issue. The matter went all the way to the county executive and the state DSS commissioner. Just when I thought the case wasn't going to pan out, I heard from the prospective foster parents. "When are the kids coming?" the woman asked. "We're all set. My 2 daughters are here to help." Well, you see, the state is concerned that payments for foster children will not be allowed since you are receiving a state pension, I said. What was said next rang out in genuine anger. "Well, so tell that asshole governor to keep his lousy payments. Just send those kids away." Hearing this, the county executive laughed and said, "Well, send the kids. We can always sue the state for that money later." It took me another 3 hours to get the children to their new foster family and get them settled in. By the time I was able to head home, it was almost 8, and it was about 9 before I arrived. The first thing I did was take a hot shower. I contemplated calling Bruce. Sometimes when I called him, we could talk for hours, but other times he was clearly limited on time. I get the impression that his clients can be quite demanding. I usually try to wait for his call, but today I just needed to tell someone about my day. I threw on my terry cloth robe and was about to call Bruce when the doorbell rang. I pulled the robe on and went to the door. I opened it on the chain. Paul was standing on the threshold, looking very well and a little guilty. "May I come in?" he asked. "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied. "I know your husband is out of town again. You're all alone. All I ask is that you come in and socialize. Maybe have a cup of coffee and talk." "I can't," I said. "You can trust me," he said. "It's not you I don't trust. It's me. Please, just a few minutes." I don't know why I let him in, but I did. I made us some coffee and sat with him on the opposite end of our large sectional couch. Sitting down, I lowered the hem of my robe. It was roomy, but too short to be comfortable in this situation. "Relax," he said. "I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm here as a friend. I heard you had a hell of a day." "Yeah," I replied, and we continued to discuss my day, and it relaxed me. I told myself that there was nothing wrong with 2 people I knew sitting around having a drink. We went from coffee to wine and had a dinner of frozen pizza. It was near midnight when he said what he must have come to say. "Elaine, I'll always be your friend, but you should know that I have a passion for you that I can only call love." At those words, I twitched nervously. "Please," he said, "let me finish. Your husband is in New York right now, meeting with organized crime and their personal anti-surveillance expert. They're planning how to defeat the government's wiretapping program. These are evil people, and he's helping them escape justice." "Stop it. I'm not listening to this. It's not fair. Bruce isn't here to defend himself." "You're very loyal, but is it fair to you to be associated with a man like that? When I followed you and fell in love with you, I learned what a wonderful and caring woman you are. Your life is about helping others. You are a saint who married the devil, but I want you to know that I will always be there for you no matter what. Over the course of the evening, we moved closer and closer to each other on the couch as we talked. I knew it was wrong, but I realized I couldn't hold back. We both knew where this was going, but it was a freight train that didn't want to stop, and then I heard the phone ring. It must have been ringing for some time. Suddenly, that fact was as obvious as who was calling. Bruce, I said, breaking free of Paul's grip. It was Bruce. Just checking, he said. Sorry, I must have woken you up. Time slipped away from me. I braced myself to answer him and try to have a normal conversation. Bruce was in a talkative mood, and he went on and on. As Bruce talked, I could watch Paul on the couch, who was getting more and more impatient. Finally, Paul smiled sadly at me and quietly walked away. Bruce's call had saved me from an irreparable breach in my marriage. But did I want to be saved? Next chapter. The DA's conference room had the dreary look of the last century, as if it hadn't changed a bit in the last 20 years. Tanya Marshall was the daughter of a former state senator, a man who had escaped prosecution and retired to get his daughter a job in the DA's office. As DA, she was no better or worse than the rest of the pathetic people who oppress the poor and defenseless and complain that the rich can hire lawyers. "Where's your gun, Mr. Gray?" she asked. "We didn't find it when we searched your house." "A gun?" I asked. "A Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum registered to you." "It's missing?" "You know it is." "I'm sorry. This is the first I've heard of it. It was stored in the top drawer of my nightstand in my bedroom. Is it really missing?" "This would be easier if we were honest with each other," she said. "Okay, go ahead and start. What evidence did your officers allegedly retrieve from my house?" "All in good time," she said. "Well then, I'll answer your questions in my own time," I said, standing up. "In that case," she said, handing me a notice of my right to appear before the grand jury. This notice was the true purpose of the meeting. I had not the slightest intention of appearing. The conclusion was obvious. I was to be indicted on 2 counts of murder. Frankly, the DA had no choice. They broke into my wife's desk and seized her diary. They knew the whole sad story of her infidelity. Of course, in the minds of women like Tanya, it read like a love story with a tragic ending. My view was somewhat different. It was a pity about the desk. It was a narrow little desk, a late colonial antique. It had sat in the dealer's display case for almost a year. We were newly married, and our daughter Rachel was just learning to walk. Elaine was in school part-time to get her master's degree in social work. I was a poor, newly minted lawyer, but I loved my wife and knew how much she wanted that desk. Every time we walked past the window, she would stop and stare at that desk. I saved every penny I could find, but when I went to buy it for our anniversary, it was no longer in the window. With bated breath, I walked into the store and asked for the very desk that was in the window. The girl behind the counter looked confused, but when she asked the manager said it was put in the back of the store. When it was delivered to our little apartment, Elaine was beyond thrilled. Over the years, I watched her at that table and thought how lucky I was to have her as my wife. Love is a funny thing. I decided it was all about those little moments. My wife's joy over the little antique desk, my daughter's first steps, moving into our first home, and my wife's pride in getting her master's degree. If you put all these moments together, you get what is called love. They opened the desk drawers and found the journal. I suppose I could have left the drawers unlocked, but then they might not have noticed the contents. Locking the drawers gave them significance, and I needed them to retrieve the diary. Still, destroying the desk hurt. Maybe it made me realize that Elaine was truly lost to me. The diary had the desired effect. Its contents soon leaked out. The pressure on the DA's office intensified. Now they had proof, and the public knew about the love plot. The unfaithful spouse and her lover had become Romeo and Juliet. January 2nd. I can't do this, can I? Jenny just laughs at my indecision. What's the matter with you two? Your husbands are out of town. You show up at his apartment and no one will know. It's so easy. How am I ever going to meet Bruce again? I don't care what people say about him. He's always been good to me. What will I say if he finds out? Blame him for leaving you alone so often. He doesn't really leave that often, and when we're together, well, it's a good marriage. It's just that Paul makes me feel things I've never felt before. Like I said, Bruce won't find out, and if he does, just do what I did to my Bob. What did you do? You remember the day we got here and he looked so upset. Yeah, I remember at one point he asked if he could lie down in the bedroom. He looked almost sick. Well, he found out that I had slept with Paul, and I told him all about it and that I still loved him. I told him there was nothing he could do about it, that a man like Paul knew how to treat women. I think he wanted to kill the man, but physically he wouldn't be a match for him. You're lucky he doesn't have a gun, I said. What's more, I don't see Bruce taking things the way Bob does. Somehow I think Bruce would do something about it, but Jenny assured me I was wrong. We discussed how much Bruce loves me and needs to realize how Bob did. I had seen Paul half a dozen times in the last 3 weeks. We were never alone together, but I saw him here and there. Perhaps he was watching me, or perhaps he was watching Bruce. My husband was home and very attentive. Today, Paul handed me a note. It had an address, date, and time. I'm pretty sure it's the address of his apartment, and it's listed for the day Bruce will be in New York. I don't want to go, but I know I will. I tell myself I'm only going, so I can ask him to stop bugging me. January 15th. God, what have I done? I spent the day at Paul's apartment. It started off well. I told him how we could never be alone together, how I couldn't betray my husband, but then it all slipped my mind, and we got down to it. I left crying that it would never happen again, but neither of us believed it was over. As I walked out of his house, I knew I would definitely come back. Next chapter. Tanya's performance in front of the jury was far above her usual performance, meaning it was good and almost certainly the work of a ghostwriter. Her boss sat there with her. District Attorney Silva Marks wasn't about to let a subordinate get all the glory, but she wasn't stupid enough to take the job herself. I represented myself. Presiding Judge Bascom warned me that a lawyer who represents himself has a fool as a client. I replied that it was better than having a fool as a lawyer. Bascom will do everything he can to see that justice is done, and I am convicted. He would go out of his way to help an unconvincing prosecution, and in his jury instructions, he would turn the concept of reasonable doubt into something more in line with guilty until proven innocent. For my part, my only concern was that someone would notice that I had an ace up my sleeve, and I was waiting for the moment to play it. I had the truth on my side, and they had the romantic story of Romeo and Juliet on theirs. The lovers were a police officer and my social worker wife. The villain in the play was me, whether I was innocent or not. Life isn't fair, and justice is rarely found in the courtroom. Sergeant McVeigh, did you open the trunk of the defendant's car? Asked Tanya of her first witness. Yes, the car immediately aroused my suspicions. It was an old brown Toyota Camry. It's not the kind of car you expect to see from an expensive lawyer, but it's very unremarkable and has a large trunk volume. I see, Tanya said, looking at the jury with a smile that spoke volumes. You see how cunning the defendant is. What, if anything, did you find in the trunk? Asked Tanya. It looks like it was recently cleaned, but we were able to find hair and fibers that matched Officer Paul Marino and Elaine Gray. So their bodies could have been placed in the trunk? Objection. The question requires speculation, I said. No, the witness is an expert, and his opinion is simply being asked. Question overruled. The witness may answer, said Judge Bascom. And so the case went. Sergeant McVeigh was happy to explain to the jury how, in his opinion, I transported and disposed of the bodies of my wife and her lover. On cross-examination, I asked, Sergeant, if the bodies were transported in the Camry, what happened to the bright blue Ford Mustang Shelby 500 GT? I don't know what you mean. Paul Moreno's car, his mobile stallion, it's nowhere to be found. Of course I don't know about that, McVeigh replied. But you do know his car is missing, and that car is unremarkable, I said more to the jury than to McVeigh. Yes, Paul's car is missing. Let's go back to the Camry. You cracked the door, but tell me why you didn't use the keys in the ignition. Perhaps we didn't notice them. Indeed, but didn't you use them to open the trunk? McVeigh looked stunned for a second, but before he could answer anything, Tanya was already on her feet, objecting. The question is debatable and assumes facts not supported by evidence. She was supported, of course. There was no point in giving facts. Along with senior investigator Kim Eng, she followed McVeigh to the podium. He told a story about pulling up the carpet in the basement and discovering traces of blood underneath. Could you identify this blood by type or DNA? Tanya asked solemnly. No, it was too decomposed. There was a strong odor of bleach in the basement, which is why I suspected we would find traces of blood. Bleach is often used to remove bloodstains. I only had a few questions. Investigator Eng, the basement was the home laundry room, wasn't it? Yes? You expected to find bleach in the laundry, didn't you? I couldn't say. I guess it would depend on the personal preference of the person doing the laundry. The 7 women on the jury didn't quite agree with Mr. Eng, but now it was time for the real show, reading my wife's diary. January of the 16th year. I feel simultaneously guilty and floating on a cloud. I can't stop thinking about Paul, about his gorgeous body and how he made me feel. And at the same time, I feel so guilty for Bruce. For the first time, I want to believe all the horrible things people say about him, but I know it's not true. Bruce has always shown his love for me, and I have repaid him with the worst betrayal. Somehow I feel that my terrible sin must manifest itself so that Bruce, looking at me, will realize what I have done to him, to us. The desk on which I am writing these lines was given to me by Bruce. It was bought at a time when we had little money. It's a real antique. I saw it in the window, but I knew there was no way we could afford it. Part of our poverty was my own doing. I dreamed of having a child, but we had only recently gotten married and couldn't think about children yet. Bruce had just started working. I was still in graduate school. Despite our poverty, I stopped taking birth control. It should have been a mutual decision, but I took it upon myself. Bruce never criticized. He expressed only joy about my pregnancy. I knew he was concerned about our finances and wanted to wait until we were more affluent. Yet, even as we struggled, he somehow found the funds to buy me an extravagant gift. My loving husband of the past 15 years, whom I betrayed so easily. I vacillate between never seeing Paul again and jumping out the door and throwing myself into the arms of my lover. When Bruce gets back from his trip tonight, I'm sure he'll know about it, and maybe that will put an end to it one way or another. I don't know what I'll say to him. I can't bear to hurt him. January 17th. Nothing happened last night. If Bruce could tell, or at least suspect what I was doing while he was gone, he gave no sign. And yet our interactions seemed strange. It was like there was a distance between us. Maybe I'm artificially creating what I'm afraid of. Bruce was acting and looked tired. For now, I'll have to wait and see. I left for work early so I wouldn't see Bruce in the bright light of the morning. I had barely made it to work when my cell phone rang. It was Paul. He wanted to talk and we chatted until I had to get to work. Talking to him somehow lifted my spirits and gave me hope that things would work out. Love would find a way, and I had to admit that what I felt for Paul was love. Maybe not as everlasting as what I had with Bruce, but it was something I'd never experienced before. January 19th. I took my time and went to what I said was a long lunch, but actually met Paul at his apartment. He works the 4 to midnight shift. We spent 2 hours together. At home, Bruce seemed calm, but I'm not sure if it's all in my head. February 12th. I've spent the last month in turmoil. My affair with Paul seems to be heating up. We see each other during the day at his house at least twice a week, and in the evenings when Bruce is out of town, which has been frequent lately. Paul tells me that Bruce is involved with some very bad people. The FBI is very concerned because all their attempts at surveillance are failing. Bruce is legally blocking their warrants and helping them acquire very sophisticated anti-bugging equipment. Materials that are illegal but can be purchased with special permits. Paul didn't say this, but I know that part of his job is still to keep tabs on my husband. I guess I should appreciate the fact that Paul almost always knows where my husband is, but the tension is growing. I find myself caught between two lovers. I love both of these men, and I can see that they are enemies. I am stuck in this no-win situation from which there is no way out. Bruce has been the most genuinely good husband, buying me little gifts for no reason, sending me flowers, and making the sweetest love to me. However, I can't shake the feeling that he somehow knows what's going on behind his back. He shows no signs of awareness, but after 15 years, I know when he is uneasy and something is bothering my husband. Next chapter. I'm sorry, Mr. Gray, but I see no problem with admitting your wife's diary into evidence, Judge Bascom said. We were in his chambers arguing about the prosecution's motion to admit the diary into evidence. I see, and the concept of hearsay doesn't bother you at all, I said. There was no question that Elaine's diary was an out-of-court statement that was being accepted as truth. It falls under one of the exceptions to the hearsay rule, Tanya objected. Really? To which one? I asked. Several, she replied, not putting any specific ones into her argument. I wasn't going to win this argument. Tanya believed she needed the diary to cement my conviction, and the judge was going to admit it. The diary is on file. If I'm wrong, you can say so on appeal, the judge said. On appeal, the prosecution would argue that the diary's admission of error was harmless. That would be less than correct, but what does it matter? Because I was guilty, correctly. Everyone knew that, including the appeals court judges. Tanya asked a very attractive clerk from her office to sit on the witness stand and read my wife's diary. The girl was about 22 years old. She had dark blonde hair styled in a straight style, deep brown eyes, and the most innocent appearance possible. She blushed so sweetly when reading my wife's letters, and thus averted the jury's condemnation of her for the lewd infidelity of the woman I had loved and been faithful to for 15 years. March 16th. Rachel went home for spring break. I haven't seen or heard from my daughter since Christmas. She seems very happy. I don't know exactly why she wanted to go to boarding school, but I suspect it has something to do with the rumors about Bruce. She loves her father, but there's no escaping what people say about him. It must be difficult for a teenager. Since Rachel is home, Paul and I can't meet at my house, and Paul thinks there might be people at his work who are suspicious of his relationship with me. It would be bad for his career if our affair became known while he is part of the team investigating Bruce. Paul plans to ask for a transfer. He wants me to leave Bruce. However, when faced with this decision, I realize that what Paul is proposing is wrong. Moreover, what I have been doing with Paul is wrong. My affair is wrong on so many levels. When I see Rachel, I realize that first and foremost, I am her mother and Bruce's wife. Neither has done anything worthy of the pain that my elopement with Paul would cause. The agony I will inflict on my family is far greater than the pain I will experience from losing Paul. I think I'm coming to my senses. This passion that has taken hold of me has clouded my senses. I need to come to my senses and do what I have to do to end Paul. I've made up my mind. When I see Paul tomorrow, I will put an end to this. I know he'll be in pain, but he'll get through it. I know for a fact that he won't lack for companionship. Jenny is just waiting for that moment. She is a young and beautiful woman with a husband who has no choice but to tolerate her infatuation with Paul. A man like Bob can't do anything about a man like Paul. Everyone thinks that Bruce is not like everyone else at all. Would Bruce hurt Paul if he found out? I don't believe Bruce would ever hurt me. But maybe I'm wrong? The horrible things people say about Bruce, they can't possibly be true. I've known him all these years, loved him all these years, and yet I have my doubts. Paul is adamant that my husband could be dangerous and fears for my safety. I just can't bring myself to believe that Bruce could hurt anyone. When I look at Bruce, I see the dear, sweet man I married, the loving father of our daughter, the man who in all the years of our marriage has always put Rachel and I first. When I see Paul tomorrow, I have to break up with him. It will hurt, but I have to do the right thing. I called Jenny and told her that she might want to call Paul after tomorrow and comfort him. Next chapter. The pretty and young paralegal Tanya finished the last entry in my wife's diary. The prosecution had hoped to portray me as an abusive, angry husband trying to come between lovers, but I don't think Elaine's diary had changed that much. After all, my wife chose her home over a haunted Lothario. Paul Moreno was a homewrecker. He knew Elaine was happily married, but he pursued her anyway. Perhaps he fully believed all the nasty stories law enforcement officials were spreading about me. Maybe he was trying to save the woman he fell in love with. In reality, the lovers waited too long and suffered a terrible fate. There are a lot of ifs in a situation like this. If Elaine had confessed to me, or if they had broken off the relationship earlier, who knows what might have happened. But that wasn't my immediate problem. The problem was saving my neck. After reading the diary, the jury was ready to convict, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. I had a long list of witnesses, but only one mattered. Jake Trumbull took the stand. On my witness list, he seemed like an ordinary witness. His expert report was 500 pages of some nonsense with a mention of the video on page 439. We started with his credentials: an electrical engineering degree from RIT, service in Army intelligence, and then 20 years in the FBI. Not a bad resume. I'd overlooked that after working for the feds, he'd been hired by the very criminal organizations he was pursuing for the government. He'd proved invaluable to me and others in fighting government surveillance. Mr. Trumbull, have you done any work for me in the past? Yes, many times. The last time you worked for me, what did you do? I installed a complete video surveillance system covering your home and office both outside and inside. We call it black cover because it's designed to uncover dirty deeds. What do you mean by dirty deeds? The usual unauthorized entry for the purpose of planting listening devices or planting evidence. And have you discovered any dirty deeds? Yes, my staff and I observed Sergeant McVeigh take the keys to a brown Camry and open the trunk. He then dumped material from a bag into the trunk. A little later, he returned with other officers and broke open the trunk with a crowbar. The officers then proceeded to collect what they called trace samples from the trunk. A shocked muttering sounded from the courtroom. Trumbull was on a roll and offered the videotape he had collected. We admitted it into evidence despite the prosecution's objections. Trumbull went on to talk about the planted blood that investigator Eng discovered. Needless to say, the prosecution's case fell apart. Without forensic evidence, they didn't even have proof that a crime had been committed. All they had was a missing pair of lovers, a missing gun, and a car that no one could find. My daughter Rachel hugged me at the not guilty verdict. She never believed I killed her mother, and that was the main thing. Many others believed I had gotten away with murder. Remarkably, no action was taken against the officers who tried to frame me. They ultimately saved my life by giving the prosecution a case that could have gone to trial. The long, dry summer turned the Schoharie River into a muddy swath. It had also exposed a blue Ford Mustang hidden in the deepest part of the channel. The bodies were still in the car. They must have been crammed into the car's frame even as the flooding creek first carried the car away and then let it sink into the deep, rushing waters. They found Elaine's GPS purse that I had planted in the car along with what was left of my wife's body. She was right. I was more than suspicious. I was collecting evidence of her infidelity. I loved her, and she hurt me deeply. In my mind, Paul Moreno was a snake coming to destroy a good marriage. It broke my heart, but I was planning a divorce, not a murder. However, the police would never have believed it. My wife and her lover were dead. If I was a saint, they would still find me guilty, but I was far from being a saint. Elaine lay beneath her lover. It was obvious that neither of them had been fully clothed at the time of death. The autopsy revealed that they had both been shot, but it turned out that the intended victim was Paul Marino. The bullets had traveled through his body and into Elaine. This double homicide was the result of using such a powerful weapon. A .44 caliber Smith & Wesson handgun was found off the floor of the Mustang. That was my gun, the same gun that went missing. If the police and prosecutor had just waited, they wouldn't have had to plant evidence. The diary made them act. It was the story of lovers separated by an abusive lawyer husband that caused the DA to act prematurely. Public opinion pushed the police into the usual chicanery. I was set up, but skill and luck saved me. As an attorney, I took pride in my work, while the forces of law and order lamented that the system had been manipulated by an unscrupulous lawyer. Next chapter. Lottie set her beer aside and gave me a winning smile. Then she put her hand on my shoulder and gave it a supportive squeeze. She didn't need to say she was supporting me, she was showing it herself. We were at Chambers, the lawyer's bar in town. Lottie had changed jobs, and I had followed her out of loyalty. On the whole, Chambers was a much nicer place for me to drink than Falcon's Rest. The cops would never forgive me a beating, and the regulars here had a certain sympathy for the retarded. A poor lawyer with a ruined reputation. That opinion was wrong. The clients I needed to attract took my acquittal on a charge of which I was so obviously guilty as the ultimate testament to my advocacy skills. As a consequence of the negative publicity, I was forced to raise my hourly rate and hire a pretty young female associate to handle the increased demand. Far from being tainted by this bizarre affair, I began to look like an anti-hero. Poor Tanya, on the other hand, was forced out of the prosecutor's office, becoming a scapegoat. My drinking buddy drank half of his Sam Adams in one gulp. "Relax, Bob. There's no need to rush. I don't have a wife back home, and yours isn't worth going back to," I said. Bob frowned slightly. I think he'd finally realized that some women, regardless of their physical attractiveness, weren't worth hitting on, and certainly his Jenny fell into that category. "I'm sorry that," he began, but clearly couldn't bring himself to continue. "Please," I said, "I didn't ask you for an apology. Of course, you must realize that under the circumstances they will not be forthcoming." "But I never meant to offend Elaine," he pleaded. "Of course you didn't. It was pure accident. A man like you is not familiar with guns. You couldn't have known that bullets would go through Officer Moreno's body and hit the woman he was copulating with," I objected. That was all poor Bob needed. Exactly. He had the seats set up so that they went all the way down like a bed. You couldn't even see who was under it, and I was so upset. I was freaking out after Jenny told me she was seeing him again. Exactly. You were in some kind of a stupor, only vaguely aware of what you were doing. But tell me, did you wipe my gun for fingerprints before you planted it? I asked. Probably, yes. I wasn't thinking straight. I stole it another time, and it was my intention to warn him. It was your gun because I knew you kept it in your bedroom for protection. Elaine gladly let me lie down when I told her I wasn't feeling well. Finding your gun was easy. You didn't hide it. I think a man like you needs that kind of protection. Actually, it was a gift from a client. I put it in the bedroom for Elaine's protection on the nights I wasn't home. He nodded solemnly, and I wondered if he'd caught the irony of the situation. She told me she was going to go out with him again, just like that. Paul's going to need some friendly reassurance, she said. I couldn't just do nothing. I drove to his house to warn him that I wouldn't stand for this. His car wasn't there. I called home, but there was no answer. I'm afraid I drew the wrong conclusion. A reasonable mistake under the circumstances, I interjected. Yes, I knew where he was taking his whores in that disgusting car. It had already begun to rain, and it was very dark when I pulled up to the county road leading to the creek. I stopped on the road and walked down to the creek. On a good night, The moon floods the place with light, but the weather was deteriorating. They were on the passenger side, and the driver's side window was partially down. I heard them laughing, and then she moaned in a way that struck me to the core. I didn't realize what I was doing. I fired without thinking, and then the gun seemed to fall out of my hand. Or maybe I dropped it. I didn't find out Elaine was in the car until much later. I'm so sorry. Will you tell the police? He asked with a concerned look. I shrugged. It's not for me to judge you. I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a hypocrite. But I killed your wife, he said. Yes, but only by bad luck. I don't know how the car ended up in the creek. I expected the car to be found right away, but when it wasn't, people started blaming you. Naturally, but with no bodies or weapons, they couldn't prove my guilt. But the GPS I put in my wife's purse told me where it was. I figured the rising water caused the car to first hit a flooded creek and then sink when it filled with water. It was only a matter of time before they found the car, the bodies, or both. Since my gun was missing, I guessed how the lovers died and who would be to blame. I'm sorry about that, and the fact that many still hold you responsible. You must turn me in, said Bob in a low, sad whisper. What can I say? We're not responsible for what people think, and I certainly can't disprove an attractive lie with an unpleasant truth. No, you are perfectly safe from me, I said. Then why did you invite me here? To give you this, I said, pulling a document from my jacket pocket. What is it? He asked. My account, of course. I've arranged one hell of a murder defense. But you made your own defense, he said. And whose fault was that? I spent time and money, and the responsible party should pay. I might add that I did a damn good job. You ought to be satisfied. It's not a bad sum, he said. It was a great defense, I countered. Do you accept American Express? Sure. I think Bob was relieved that I would keep his secret, but as I said, I'm in no position to judge. We live in a society where the presumption of innocence has been replaced by the presumption of guilt. In such an unjust world, a man must live by his wits. Lottie brought me another Boston Lager when Bob left. Are you all right? She asked with genuine concern in her voice. Yes, things are working out for the best after all. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.